There's a very close and intimate connection between fire and judgment in the Bible. After all, God's end-time judgment will be called hellfire. We find in the book of Revelation chapter 14, beginning at verse 9, where the Bible says, "And the third angel followed them, saying with a loud voice, If any man worship the beast and his image, and receives his mark in his forehead or in his hand, the same shall drink of the wine of the wrath of God, which is poured out without mixture into the cup of his indignation. And he shall be tormented with fire and brimstone." So the person that drinks of the cup of God's wrath, his judgment wrath, will be tormented with fire. Here we see in this verse, fire, a judgment in the cup of God. Now friends, this is interesting. For the only other place in the Bible where we see the Father have a cup of judgment wrath, mingled with even fire symbolically, is in the book of Matthew chapter 26 in the Garden of Gethsemane, where Christ was even sweating great drops of blood, clenching the ground. He said, "Father, let this cup pass from me. And so nevertheless, not as I will, but as thou wilt." And so what do we learn here? Jesus Christ in the Garden of Gethsemane was drinking of the judgment wrath of God, was experiencing, as it were, hellfire for every single man. Did he drink that cup? He drank that cup. Now, what am I saying, friends? We have a story now where Jesus Christ is in the middle of the night in the Garden of Gethsemane, and automatically the chief priests, the elders, the officers, the soldiers, they come to arrest him. And Peter was with him now. Peter takes out his sword and cuts off one of the soldiers' ear. Now, notice what the Bible says. In John chapter 18 and verse 11, we pick up the story. The Bible says, Christ turns to Peter after he cut off the guy's ear. He said, "Peter, put thy sword back into thy sheath. The cup which my Father hath given me, shall I not drink it?" And so here we see that Christ in the Garden of Gethsemane began to drink of the cup of wrath of God and literally began to experience hell and judgment fire for every single man. Friends, what began in the Garden of Gethsemane reached its climax on the cross. Don't miss that point. The old song says, "Lest I forget Gethsemane, lest I forget thine agony, lest I forget thy love for me, Lord, lead me to Calvary." And so what began in Gethsemane reached its climax on Calvary. Don't miss that. So when Christ was in the Garden of Gethsemane, he began to experience the judgment fire of God. Now we pick up in the story, the elders handcuff Christ, they tie him, and they bring him now into the judgment hall. So now Christ is not only being subjected to the judgment of God, but now he's being subject to the judgment of man. They spit on him, they bruised him, they scourged him, they mocked him, all these things. And so notice this now, Christ here is in the fire, symbolically. Where's Peter? Friends, notice what the Bible says. In verse number 16, the Bible says that while Christ was inside, Peter stood at the door without. Not within, without, meaning outside. So picture this now, Christ is in the fire while Peter is outside. Now, what is the condition of outside? Notice what the Bible says. If any man is not where Christ is, it could only be one condition. And that's why in the book of John chapter 18, beginning at verse 18, the Bible says, "And the servants and the officers stood there, who had made a fire of coals, for it was cold. And they stood there and warmed themselves, and Peter stood there and warmed himself." Friends, what am I saying? If you're not where Jesus is, it's going to be cold. But notice this now. Jesus Christ is in the fire. Peter is not where Christ is. Peter's outside. Outside is cold. But Peter's not the type of a guy that wants to be fully hot, neither does he want to be fully cold. So what does he do? He goes with those that make a fire and stays warm. Friends, Peter's not hot. Peter's not cold. Peter wants to be warm. Does this remind you of anything in the Bible? In the book of Revelation chapter 3, the Bible says, "I know your works. So then, because you're neither cold nor hot," you're not cold, you're not hot. "So then, because you are lukewarm, I will vomit you out of my mouth." And so here the Bible is saying that there's going to be a condition of people that literally are not hot, they're not cold, they're lukewarm. And so here we see Peter. He's not in the fire with Christ. He's not in the cold with the world. But what is he? Lukewarm. Friends, are you lukewarm? Peter even himself, when Christ foretold in the last video we've seen, Christ is like, "Listen, I have to go to Jerusalem to suffer many things of the chief priests, elders, and scribes, and be killed and be raised again the third day." But Peter said, "No, Lord, this shall not be. Please don't say that." And so Christ had to rebuke Peter. Why? Because Peter did not want to endure the cross. And so what does he do? He doesn't go on the fire with Christ. He doesn't stay in the cold. he stays lukewarm. What is your comforting fire? Are you building a comforting fire? Do you want to be hot? Do you want to be cold? Or do you really want to be lukewarm? Is there somebody else at your work that needs to be evangelized? Is there a YouTube video that you need to make? A song you need to sing? A message you need to preach? Whatever it may be, are you neglecting? Because you don't want to be hot. But really and truly, you don't really want to be too cold. So you make that comforting fire and stay lukewarm. This is Lessons from the Life of Peter. And what is your fire?